I want to share a few thoughts as I prepare to go on leave around the sermon title, Searching for Sunday. Searching for Sunday, which is also the latest book published, I think it posthumously by Rachel Held Evans. She was a well-known author in evangelical circles, but a voice that differed from the dominant voices from those quarters. And I haven't read the book yet, but I read a review of it, and I want to read a few quotes from it because I think it is relevant for what I thought to share with you. The review concludes with the following description of the book. It is a memoir about making do and taking risks, about the messiness of community and the power of grace. Searching for Sunday is about overcoming cynicism to find hope and somewhere in between church. The messiness of community and the power of grace, overcoming cynicism to find hope and somewhere in between church. And then also from the review, perhaps to give you a bit more background on this book and the author, like millions of her millennial peers, Rachel Held Evans didn't want to go to church anymore. The hypocrisy, the politics, the gargantuan building budgets, the scandalous church culture seem so far removed from Jesus. Yet, despite her cynicisms and misgivings, something kept drawing her back to church. And so she set out on a journey to understand church and to find her place in it. She passed away recently, I think age 37, after a severe reaction to medication that she received for an infection. I think searching for Sunday is a good metaphor for where much of the so-called mainline church find itself today. Searching for Sunday, trying to figure out what church is about, what it should be doing, where it is heading, and where it should be heading. And I think those questions are relevant for us as well, Congregational Church of Topsfield. What is it that we should keep ourselves busy with? What should be the main focus of our existence? What should be the purpose of us, of everything that we do, of gathering like this on a Sunday, of all the beautiful projects that we have, the ministries we have? What is it about? That is the one railing or yardstick or milepost that I would like to put down for the sermon. And the other one is a comment made to me by a church leader, and that is one of our own. When we had a conversation, I asked to talk to him about how he sees the road forward for us after the Fields project and the culmination of that in the town meeting, and the impact of that on our church and on our members and so forth. So, right, what do you think? Where should we go? And his comment was, we should preserve our community. And he didn't mean the Topsfield community, probably that as well to an extent, but the church community, us, the people, not the buildings, the facilities that for some is what should be preserved, but he was talking about the people, the relationships. Searching for Sunday, what should it be about? And then the comment, we should preserve our community. And I agreed with him. And if you look around today, how can we not say we should preserve this community? I mean, here we are gathered in all our splendor and glory and all the beauty. People of God gathered here to worship. What is church about in this day and age, and what will church be about a few generations from now, or just one generation from now? I think it is good to ponder that. I found reference to that also in the passages that Joe read for us. One from the book of Isaiah, a beautiful poem. Part of that passage is a poem, extremely intricately woven, masterfully composed, and you miss most of the poetic part of it if you do not read it in Hebrew. And I must confess, I didn't read the whole poem in Hebrew, I read parts of it. And it's absolutely beautiful, the intricate wordplay between the different phrases used and the words used. But it was attributed to the prophet Isaiah that acted as prophet in Israel. He was a resident of Jerusalem, son of Amos, and he was probably a priest working in the temple, but we don't know for sure. This was attributed to him early in the 8th century. He acted as prophet 700 to around 740, 742. That is before the birth of Jesus, in that era. So this is an allegory, and it describes this farmer setting out to create this beautiful vineyard with the best quality grapes known in Israel at that time from that specific valley, and doing everything on that hilly soil and the rocky soil and the hills of Israel to create a spot where this very well preserved and constructed operation to plant the vineyard and to make wine was established. Everything done perfectly. And I associated with it because I'm also breaking in a rocky hill, planting some vines and experimenting what will make it through the New England climate. And with the rabbits as well, this year especially. They strip every little new vine that I try to plant from all these leaves 3-4 times. But that's besides the point. This farmer trying to create this beautiful vineyard with the container hewn from rock, solid rock, where the wine can be kept and where it's fermented and processed, and then where it flows over naturally through gravitation or gravity into the next vat in the rock. And then the disappointment. These best quality vines that were gathered and planted and taken care of with a watchtower to scare away people that perhaps want to pinch the grapes or other animals that want to do harm to the vineyard. And then the disappointment, wild grapes, which is something I think that we can also associate with in New England. The varieties of wild grapes here is just ferocious. I mean, it covers everything in one summer, like you can't believe, and it's difficult to get rid of. So this vineyard produced wild grapes. That's not suitable to make wine from. And then the audience is invited. The audience, which was probably temple goers, because scholars think this poem was created in the reign of King Jotham of Israel for the Festival of the Booths, a well-known agricultural festival. So this was probably read there or perhaps even sung. And then the audience is invited, what should be done with this vineyard, where everything was done to get the best possible circumstances, all the hard work, and then this terrible result. And then the answer is provided in poetic form. Abandon the vineyard. Destroy everything because it doesn't bear the expected fruit. And then the allegory clearly says, the farmer, that is God, and the vineyard, that is Israel. So the Israelites were invited to pronounce judgment over themselves. And then the description is given of what wild grapes, a bad result, what it means. And it says very clearly, what God was looking for with Israel was justice. But what was found was bloodshed. And what God was looking for was righteousness, but what was found was devastation and the cry of the oppressed. Cries of the oppressed, wailing of the oppressed. That is what the Hebrew phrase means. Instead of righteousness, wailing of the oppressed, and instead of justice, bloodshed. And then comes the few verses, and it's part of a longer poem, where it gives an indication what the author had in mind of this poem. The author of this poem had in mind. It was written in a time of prosperity for Israel. The economy was extremely strong. It was one of the best, on the surface, best times ever in the history of Israel, in those two kingdoms. Things were going well. And it speaks of people getting wealthy and getting more and more land and consolidating land, building a lot of houses. But then the warning, desolation is coming. It will not last. Wild grapes, the undesirable result, injustice that was done. This links up very well with what Jesus was talking about. The three parables about the kingdom of God, or the realm of God. And the kingdom of God for Jesus simply meant, if you read through all the material, that central theme of his teaching, his message, a condition or a situation where compassion and God's love determines how things are done and what is done. And these three parables speaks to the setting of priorities. What is most important? And Jesus said, for my followers, my disciples, there is one yardstick. That is to accept the teaching and to follow in the teaching and to express the teaching of the kingdom of God. That is what is most valuable, and without that, there is also judgment, as the last parable says, like the net gathering in, and there will be a separation. And I'm not going to brimstone and hellfire today, because that's not my thing. But there is a line drawn between people that live the kingdom, that express the kingdom of God in their very being as their highest priority, and those that do not. I think that is the line that runs through the Bible. that we find in the prophets, not only Isaiah, but Micah, Hosea, Ezekiel, and others as well, Amos especially, and also in the first few books of the Bible that the Jewish people call the Torah. This teaching about the priority of the love of God and the expression of that in your life, in all relationships, whether it's on an individual basis or on a corporate level in society. That is, that justice should be done, that love should reign, that compassion should dictate. And for us today, and looking towards the future as Congregational Church of Topsfield, as part of the mainline church, searching for Sunday as a metaphor, and preserving our community. What is it that we should preserve? What should we find when we search for Sunday? What should we be looking for when we search for Sunday? I think it is this: being gathered on the covenant of love, and the covenant of God's love that Jesus called the kingdom, and that kingdom that finds expression in justice being done, in peace and in compassion. And this covenant is an interesting thing. In many circles, the covenant, God's agreement with us, is seen as looking at the promises God made in the Bible, standing on the promises of God. And I saw a lot of books published around that, but there's one that counted them, the promises in the Bible. Over 3,000, this author says. Things God promised you if you are a believer. And then on the other hand, this is the promise part of the covenant, the one emphasis. On the other hand, a view on the covenant as a willingness of God's people to say, I give myself freely and willingly to follow in the teachings of Jesus. The one, to me, is a self-centered approach. It's more like a deal, where you go to get the maximum from God, where you almost go to the Bible and say, look, you promised this, and you promised this, and you promised this. It's like entering into a business deal and say, God promised me this, therefore I want this in return for what God promised me. On the other hand, I think the selfless approach towards the covenant to say, I enter into agreement with God to be a follower of Jesus, to give myself so that the world that Jesus spoke about can be realized. And I think it's clear the totally different, or the big difference between the two approaches. I tend, though it's not probably the attractive one in many senses, because it asks for you to give and to overcome yourself and to remove yourself as the center of your life and to place in its place, to replace it with that kingdom that Jesus was speaking about. I tend to think Jesus probably meant the second interpretation of a willing removal of ourselves to enter into agreement to do what Jesus spoke about. That is what I would like us to search for. That is what I think we should strive for. And that should be at the heart of everything that we as Congregational Church of Topsfield do. We can have many magnificent ministries. We can excel and do beautiful things. But if at the heart of our very existence there is not the stepping into the agreement to be God's people and to follow in the footsteps of Jesus, if that is not present, then I think wild grapes is what the vineyard is producing. And I'm not speaking in a voice of condemnation. I'm trying to understand the tradition that we are part of. And I'm inviting you to search with me, not only for Sunday, but for the soul of our tradition. The full weight of what we find in our sacred text, right through it. And my prayer is that in the time that we will not see each other, that we will keep ourselves busy wherever we may travel or whatever we may do, with this priority that Jesus asked us to have in our lives, this kingdom business, this realm of God, and how it gets legs and how it finds itself and how it finds expression in the life of us as individuals and also in the life of us as a church. Let us embark on this journey. As the UCC often says, God is still speaking. I think that is true. But the question is, are we still listening? Are we still hearing? And are we willing to do the hard work, because it is indeed very hard work, to find that pearl, that treasure of God's will, and to do that in this world. Let us search for it. And may we find it and celebrate it and be church with purpose. Amen.